So we've got a great day planned for you today. Again, good food. We're adjusting temperatures because we know that was an issue yesterday. We're hoping that everyone brought sweaters as well because some rooms are a little harder to adjust. We're starting out today with a fabulous, fabulous keynote speaker. Those of you who were here last year made lots of recommendations that she come back because she has a lot of good information to share. And she's broadening her talk today, so I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. And Ami Santos will be introducing her and share more about that. But what we want you to do is spend some time really thinking about the whole child. So as you think about what goes on later in your planning sessions today and in the strands that you attend, we really want you to reflect on your classroom and think about the whole child. So part of what we're doing today is we're introducing and bringing up some things related to social emotional that we want you to start connecting to how you think about your projects. Dorothy will give you a great intro, and then you'll move on to your strands. We've got a number of different things going on today, and if you pull out your schedule, you'll be able to see that we've packed your day. So, without further ado, what I would like to do is introduce you to someone who actually is going to be doing the introduction. So you know how we do that. But part of the reason why we do that is because we want to give you exposure to faculty in our college who are doing some extraordinary work. And so today, I'm very, very happy to introduce you to a friend and colleague, Ami Santos. Dr. Ami Santos is an associate professor in the Department of Special Education, and she shares a lot of interests with a number of people in this room, but one of her areas of interest is social emotional development of young children. And so it connects very nicely with Dorothy's presentation. She works with teachers at the local, state, and national level, providing professional development in early childhood special education. She is very interested in looking at the impact of culture, race, and language on the delivery of services to young children with disabilities, in particular in the ages of birth to 5, but she goes into, hey, you like that, Ami? Much more information than you cared for. But she's also doing a lot of cross-disciplinary research, which I think is very interesting. She's working with the Department of Human and Community Development and also the Departments of Psychology on some research looking at the father's influence and enhancing positive mother and child outcomes. So, I'm so pleased that you're here today, Ami, and Ami's been facilitating the session. She's one of the professors facilitating the session on early childhood. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and we're glad you're here.
I thought I could enlarge my font here on my pad, but I can't, so I still have to wear my reading glasses. So sorry. Good morning. So just by show of hands, how many of you here today were here last year and heard Professor Espelage give a keynote? Well, you are in for another treat, and for those of you who are hearing her for the first time today, you are in for a real treat. Bullying is a topic that touches our lives in so many ways, both personally and professionally. As we look around this room, I would guess that the majority of us here today have been touched by bullying, whether it be as a victim, a witness to, or we know someone who is a bully or has been bullied. We are fortunate today to have the opportunity to be with the leading expert on this very important topic. Professor Dorothy Espelage has spent much of her career dedicated to bringing this issue to the forefront of our society's collective consciousness. Her groundbreaking research on bullying prevention is giving administrators, teachers, parents, and students the necessary tools to begin to address this problem in our schools and society. Professor Espelage joined the faculty at the University of Illinois in 1997, so very young. After completing her psychology degrees at Virginia Commonwealth, Radford, and Indiana University, which we'll forgive her for that. She has brought national exposure and prominence to Illinois, having authored multiple articles, chapters, and books, and most recently, the 2011 White House brief on bullying among LGBTQ. She is constantly quoted in the national press, including the Wall Street Journal, Time, and USA Today. And I want to throw in People magazine too. She has made numerous TV appearances, speaking as the reasoned expert voice whenever a story on bullying is covered in the media. In fact, you can brag to your friends that after today, you don't have to go through Kevin Bacon to say that you were this close to Lady Gaga and Oprah Winfrey. So, if you are her friend on Facebook, you will see that Professor Espelage's expertise continues to be of high demand, presenting on her work across the country and around the world. We are so glad that she is able to join us today at Chancellor's Academy. So without much further ado, please help me welcome Professor Dorothy Espelage.
Good morning. I did go back and look and to see what I presented last year, which felt like yesterday in my life. And there was a lot of information. You guys were really patient, so I'm surprised I was asked back. So, but then I thought I had 2 hours this morning. So let's see how this goes. No. So let me first kind of talk to you about the thinking. In the last year, you can imagine bullying has been at the forefront. I talk to people every day that think that bullying just emerged in our society, and it's an immediate epidemic, right? So they clearly haven't read my work for the last 18 years, and that's okay. But what's happened is that there's been kind of this almost a panic, a national panic around this situation. And what folks have been doing is kind of grabbing any program, any kind of approach, so much so that even in Minnesota they pay Scary Man $6,000 a day, he's all tatted up and pierced up, to go in and scare the children so they'd stop bullying, right? So that's just one example of the beautiful things that I hear in my life. So look, www.scaryman.com. Yes. So what I'm going to try to do today in a very brief 50 minutes, and I did really take the dense research aspects out of this, so if you were not here last year, you're not going to get the summary of our 100 articles coming out of our labs or the groundbreaking work, although I'll try to hint to that at the end of the talk. What I want to talk to you today about is the potential use of the social-emotional learning framework, which is showing some extreme promise in the country. However, when I was on the Hill 2 weekends ago and had Congress and Senate staffers show up, all of like 23 years old. What a cool gig they have, right? And I'm talking to these Congress and Senate staffers, and about 15 of them showed up, both Republican and Democrat, because they heard this Professor Espelage is saying what we're doing isn't working. And so I sit in the staff briefing there in the House of Representatives, and they're shocked. What do you mean? We don't have proven programs. What do you mean? They're on the National Registry. What do you mean? So I got the ear of them, and it looks like the program, the Norwegian program that I complained about last year, you guys heard about this, was taken off the National Registry. It is no longer on the National Registry, and hopefully will be off by blueprints very soon. If you don't know what I'm talking about, ask somebody that was here last year. But I'm going to allude to this a little bit. So I want to talk about social-emotional learning as a framework. Now, if you know SEL, you know there's tons of programs. So I'm not promoting one program. I just wholeheartedly believe that if we want to care about the entire child and give them a trajectory, both in the academic and the social domain, and just life, then we're going to have to back up, slow down a little bit, and think. If we do not instill the social-emotional learning, which is an umbrella term, it's a fancy term, but we all know what it is, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, who's going to do it? And just telling them to stop bullying and criminalizing the bullies really not going to help us. So let's get us started here. I don't know if I can't read that, and but we do a lot of work. So you can go to espelageagainstbullying.com. Not my favorite website address, but that's what the undergrads decided on. So you have to give them power sometime. EspelageAgainstBullying.com, you'll see that we have links to a lot of the stuff that I would have talked about if I had 2 hours. Lots of resources for teachers and research evidence. We've done a lot of work. There's about 25 PhDs that would be standing behind me and about 5,000 undergrads that have helped us do this work, so I don't do it alone. Okay, so let me just kind of, we have this public awareness. Even Lady Gaga, Born This Way Foundation, has taken on bullying, although she says it's not a bullying agenda, which is interesting. And she was never bullied, by the way, so she keeps changing her mind. So anyway, with awareness comes misperception. And so this is where we're at. Most folks, if it's a taxi cab driver, mostly these are the people I talk to when I'm on the road, because I make friends with anyone because I'm lonely. You've heard that from last year too, right? It hasn't changed. It's been a long year. So talk to me. So bullying is an epidemic or a pandemic. And in fact, the bullying rates have not changed, right? Only awareness has in 17 years. And it's not all cyberbullying, which I'm going to go through fast. There's a huge misunderstanding that there's a bully-suicide link, that they're linked, that somehow if you're victimized, you're going to commit suicide. Well, if we know that about 40% of kids are involved in bullying from bullying victim or bully victim, then we would have a hell of a lot more suicides happening in this country if that's the fact. And what we do know from research, and we have a special issue coming out on this, is that 15% of youth suicide can be explained by pure victimization, right? There's other things. That 85% would be depression, family dysfunction, economic deprivation, all kinds, poverty, name it, homelessness, yeah. Bullying, we can eradicate it, we're still going to have youth suicide. There's also this notion now, and this is mostly being driven by legislation, of families whose kids have committed suicide, and it makes total sense that you want these bullies punished. And there's this perception that bullies are criminals. If that's the case, a few of us in here probably are criminals. I don't know, given that 17% of the youth population engage in bullying. So this kind of bully to criminal trajectory is a problem because this isn't going to help our kids develop into a strong workforce. There's also this idea that bullies need to be punished. And that's exactly what we're doing in our schools. And it's leading to the suspension and expulsions. I said this last year, and it's continuing in the state, of African American kids, and that school to prison pipeline is only strengthening. So we better reevaluate what we're doing with kids in our classroom as opposed to labeling them and expelling them and suspending them when we don't understand the phenomenon. And this idea that bullies come from dysfunctional families, that's absolutely not true. There's cases in this city as we speak where very good kids are getting involved in bullying that come from really educated families. I'm not naming any names, but good kids can get involved in bullying, and we all know this. And if we think that in fact they're bad, that their family's bad, then we're going to have this same conversation 10 years from now about why things aren't working. Okay. This you can't read either, but let me tell you what it says. Maybe you can read it, but you know, you're 40, you probably are starting to get a little blurry there. Michelle. So one thing that we need to think about, and this is the paper that came out since I spoke with you last year, and I can send you, it's a great paper, but one in which it's going to require about 4 pots of coffee and a couple weeks to read. I'd take it paragraph by paragraph, but essentially what it shows is that if we continue to see the behaviors, not just bullying, but what you see as problematic behaviors in the classroom, as maladaptive behaviors, then we will never solve the problems, and we will never help kids. Because, yes, this is based on evolutionary psychology, but essentially what it says is that we have this notion of at risk, at risk. I mean, how many times do we just say, she's at risk? And I just stop people and I'm like, what exactly do you mean by that? Well, you know, at risk. You know, the family's this way, low achievement, at risk. A lot of the at-risk behaviors that we talk about actually do not lead to adverse outcomes. If you read this paper, and it takes you back 100 years of developmental research to say, when we say at-risk, we think and we assume that that means that somehow there's going to be compromised, adverse academic and social outcomes. When in fact, that's not always the case. Many of the kids in your classroom, what you see as maladaptive behavior is real darn adaptive in the environment they come from, right? So, and this is why social emotional learning is one avenue to help them shift what we see as maladaptive, right? They see as adaptive, they're gonna hold on to, because that keeps them going day to day. But how do we shift that so that they can then learn other strategies. In some ways, we think about it going back to biculturalism literature or switching within the context. You know, can these kids develop and shift their, what you see as maladaptive to adaptive within the classroom at the same time, holding on to what is very adaptive in their communities, right? So we have to start thinking about this differently, and that's what this article talks about. And what they talk about is that if we think about these behaviors differently, then we need to change the environment such that these kids can try something different. Okay, so there's going, and I can provide this to you, this PowerPoint. I thought I had 2 hours. So I was going to review the literature, the 30,000 articles on bullying. So anyway, there's bullying definition there. We know it's verbal, physical, relational, and it can involve cyber stuff. And here are your statistics. So again, if we're thinking that bullies are criminals, then we have 17% of our 3rd through 8th graders that are going to be convicted felons. That's absolutely not true. We just did some analysis of our Central Illinois data. And none of our bullies have been arrested in Central Illinois. The kids that have been arrested, though, are in environments where their peers are negative and deviant, and their families are displaying violence, and they're in neighborhoods where there's a gang presence. They're not necessarily bullies, right? So we have to think about that 17% and the heterogeneity there. 8% are our bully victims, and these are the kids that tend to be our school shooters. And that's kind of a flippant comment, but those are the kids that know exactly what it's like to be victimized and then become aggressive themselves and tend to have the most compromised clinical profile. And those are the kids you're going to have to do more than universal programming with. And then, of course, we just have kids standing around, ignoring it. And last year I presented the beautiful literature that's emerged in the last 5 years on bystander intervention. And it's not as simple as empower the bystander. It's a little complex than that. There's a code of silence, and so we have to think about that. But let me know if you want that literature, you know, in your spare time. Here, just so we can calm everybody in the room that wasn't here last year and didn't get the message, we know that more than 80% of youth are not bullied when they're online. And actually, we know very little about bullying online. We're starting to uncover it, but it seems that most of it is rude behavior and incivil behavior and disrespectful behavior. Kind of what's mirroring our classrooms and our society is playing out in this venue. 75% of the kids that say that they do experience it doesn't really upset them. They tend to unfriend people, right? I just had to unfriend a person. I didn't know how to do that. I called my niece, she's 11. I was like, how do I unfriend? She's like, you're gonna unfriend somebody? I was like, yeah, but how do I do it? She's like, you wanna talk about it? I was like, no, I don't wanna talk about it, I just wanna unfriend her. So this is good, and I feel good about it. I had to go to therapy before I unfriended her, but you know, now I'm gonna have to go back, now that I'm in town, process it, because I miss her. So anyway, my niece is like, you wanna talk about it? This is through Skype, so. It's great, social-emotional learning skills. We do know that there are kids that are victimized across the venue, so school, outside, and through the cell phone. And we are concerned about that group. We tend to think that group stays within the context of an undesirable situation. And then finally, we do know at the national level that text messaging victimization increasing, but we know that face-to-face in-school bullying is still the most prevalent. You wouldn't know that from the media, that's for sure. There's a book. This is actually the only trade book I wrote. Probably will be the last trade book I write, so buy it. And it's probably outdated anyway. And you probably get $1 on www. You just go to Amazon, it's probably 50 cents. But actually, it's a nice book. Sure. Okay, so we've written books and articles, when we think about, you know, how does this unfold, certainly the socio-ecological perspective is an important one, and we know that generally, I'm going to summarize about 40 of our articles and say that, you know, context matters, families matter, societies matter. If anything that's come from the public awareness, the raising of bullying as a situation is that everybody is now recognizing that it's more than a school problem, which that's great, I think that's wonderful, but that means we need to do more. 2011 was the first time I did a webinar for coaches in the United States, 2011. There are 3 articles written on PE and bullying. 3. You guys remember PE? Okay, do you see? As society, we've been reluctant to uncover what's happening in our society, 3 articles. Most of the bullying literature is focused on white, middle class, lower to middle class kids. Very little on the very diverse population that we have. Did we not have a tipping point day a couple weeks ago? We did. You guys heard about that in Champaign? Yes. Yes, the tipping point, where white people were no longer the majority because there was an ethnic minority debate, which is ethnic minority doesn't fit anymore, so I don't know what we're going to do in our language. So we need to think about that we haven't been culturally sensitive. Now, social-emotional learning is very different. And that's why I'd rather go down SEL track than the bully prevention track, because the bully prevention track, they're clueless, kind of clueless, and they're not wanting to go down that cultural track. They don't want to go down the disability track. They don't want to go down the sexual orientation track. They do. There's a few of us, and then we're marginalized. So the SEL, they will go there. Okay. You're probably like, what is she talking about? Okay, so this is the real positive part of my talk, and I'm going to fly through this because I thought I had 2 hours. And so, anyway, I was thinking of you guys on the train. How am I going to talk for 2 hours? Okay, so let's talk about the meta-analysis. This is very important because this is what I presented on the Hill when the staffers were like, what? What? What do you mean? These programs are all on these lists. I was like, I know. Clearinghouse, what works, best practices, National Registry, blueprints. Are we going to slow it down? I don't know. I don't really know. Getting the program off of the National Register was big, but this is money making. But this is the provenness of our bullying prevention programs. A meta-analysis is kind of a statistical summary of the research of what works under what conditions. Ken Merrill in 2008 evaluated 16 programs across 6 countries, 6 studies in the United States. Only 2 of the US studies were published in the United States. All showed small to negligible effects. We are not moving the needle. We are not reducing bullying behavior in this country. We are absolutely not. And I'm not out to get anybody, and I don't have an agenda. In some of these studies, we actually have what's called etrogenic effects. We increase bullying, and we pull these programs out, and we do nothing, okay? These programs are based on the Norwegian program that's on every list. Google it, OLWEUS, and you will find that this is the program that we are pushing on our schools, right? But we're not having any impact. The Farrington and Tofty study now has looked at about 70 studies. If you go to the appendix of that study and you look at the column that says US study, then you look at the Cohen's D or the effect size next to that column, you will see that none of the studies reduce bullying in this country. Absolutely 0. Now, when I was presenting these findings, and I think in every state people send me an email, I'm waiting for somebody, well, what do you mean by that? Why do you keep saying that? Wasn't there a study in 2007? Yes, actually there was a study in 2007 that showed this program, Always Bullying Prevention Program, worked for only white kids. I was presenting at the Futures Without Violence in DC, and there was a group from North Dakota, and they said, that works for us. Woo! I was like, okay, there you go. There's your proof, 1 study. Okay, so essentially we are promoting programs, and this, to pick on this program, right? But I can make a list of 30 that they don't even have that study, right? Tribes, make up an acronym, it's associated with bullying prevention, right? So we have to recognize that something's not happening with the bullying prevention programs. More recently, there's been several papers published on social-emotional learning approach to bullying prevention. One I will mention if I get to that slide, that was published in School Psych Review, and we can make that available to you. Pretty darn impressive RCT showing an impact. And then we're starting to show some remarkable results in our study as well, which I'll show you. But essentially, when you go into the United States schools and you say, okay, I want you to put this bullying initiative together, and I need the teachers to form an advisory group, and I need to have stakeholders from the parents, and we need to do an assembly, and I'd like you to put some posters up, and I want you to meet every, advisory group should meet every, and then we're going to have classroom. Unless you're paying the teachers and feeding them, I know, we feed you. We feed teachers. This isn't going to happen, right? And it drops off because the accountability rests with a really high-achieving OCD teacher, right? That just really has this agenda to make it happen. The sustainability is not there. And I'm assuming even when I say the sustainability isn't there, that implementation is there. We're not even at the point where these programs can be implemented unless it's something that teachers you can implement and prep pretty darn quickly, and that's based on science, and the kids get excited by. When we come in and just say, have a serious talking to the bully, That's not going to work. It doesn't shift the climate. You're not giving those kids life skills to do something different. So we have to recognize that there's a huge developmental literature. You know, we've gotten on this bully bandwagon, and I think I got on, and I'd like to get off of it. And I'm trying, so this is why I'm getting on the SEL bandwagon. To think about, we understand that there's overlapping risk and protective factors. Hawkins and Catalano talked about this decades ago, and you can imagine how frustrated they are to say that we know what places a child at risk for social and academic kind of issues and problems. We know what protects them. So why are we ignoring this huge body of literature? Now remember, social-emotional learning is an umbrella term that came out of a conference in 1994, where lots of folks got together to talk about social-emotional learning. And that's the umbrella term. So what about skills to manage life? I want to show a video. Hey, Jordan, I'm going to ask you to just come here. Yeah. Like even changing the slides. I'm going to take Jordan on the road with me. He's going to go on the road. So I want you to watch this video. You're going to make it happen, right, Jordan? Okay, hold on one second. Let me set it up. Set it up. So I'm going to show you essentially a PSA, public service announcements. There's lots out there trying to empower kids to do the right thing. I want you to pay attention. Pull out a pen and a piece of paper. When the kids, you got to think deep. I hope you had 2 cups of coffee here. When the kids are talking, what skills do these kids need or have they used when they're talking? So if they say, I'm going to tell them to stop it, what skill does a kid need to stop a bully from bullying them? What skills do you see in this video? All right, Jordan. You want to throw out some, what skills do these kids need? Throw some out. What'd you hear? What you got? Yes, they are. No, Human Rights Campaign, they get the best. Courage.
I felt like they were little parents. Like they were just saying things that adults had told them. You know, if you feel bullied, then you should say blah, blah, blah.
Right. But what other skills?
Drugs, they wouldn't do it.
That's right. So it's in other skills though. If you move beyond the fact that they're trying to get across a message in a short PSA. Talk. They have to have communication skills. They have to be assertive. They have to have empathy. You have to understand their feelings. You guys need to go through some social-emotional learning training, right? I mean, you know, beyond, like, what are we asking them to do? You're asking them to express how they feel, to stand up for themselves, to feel good enough about themselves to stand up for themselves. Do you see the complexity of this? Because it affects my self-esteem, right? Now, and I could pull 1,000 of those PSAs offline. And now we use this with the kids, and they immediately identify. They don't say, oh, they're scripted. They immediately identify, but they also see the challenges. And we immediately have a conversation about, you know, well, that's just a little bit too easy, because what if they come after me and it gets worse, and it has done this, and I've had those experiences. But what are we asking them? Bravery, courage, empathy, assertiveness, communication, listening, going to an adult. All of those encompass social-emotional learning. Most bullying prevention programs beyond, here's a definition, go tell someone, doesn't really address the larger issues associated. What skills do these kids need? That's not only going to help them with bullying, but help them engage with their peers, help them, you know, engage with their family, their siblings. If you remember last year, the number one predictor of bullying in this state is sibling aggression. So all of this spills over into that context. Okay, Jordan. So I'll give you something to think about. Like there's this, we have an adultism around these types of things where we just assume, like, just stick up for your friend. This adultism has really slowed us down within the context of bullying prevention. So it's probably not that simple. Because in some ways we're saying there's not a simple solution to address the aggression in our schools, but at the same time, social-emotional learning isn't that complex. If you think about, we are thinking, feeling individuals. And I'll send you this so you'll have the links here. I encourage you to go. I'll make sure you get the link to watch that and talk about the research evidence. I oftentimes, when I present to parents and teachers, they have that first reaction of, oh, what are you, a therapist? Right? And so I like to show that and then contrast it, like we felt much more comfortable with the active listening. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? But so I'm not sure what happened in the field, whether it's even psychologists question, you know, doing this type of work within the context of schools. And it's sometimes seen as this, you know, touchy-feely perspective. Jordan, can you get me back on the PowerPoint? Thank you, please. Please. So I think we have to recognize that social-emotional learning, if in fact we do not do this in the schools, where will this happen? All of you, how many of you are parents? How many of you do social-emotional learning training from day one with your kids, your partners, your spouses? Okay, so this, I get pushback from teachers around social-emotional learning, right? We don't have time for this. Yeah, you need to make time, because we know the meta-analysis shows that academic achievement will increase by 11%. I'm going to show you some of our results within the next 10 minutes, because that's all I have left. So I think we have to, you know, there's a big pushback even on the Hill about social-emotional learning. Now, we come from a state where we have standards, right? We have Castle, we have Roger Weisberg. And it's starting to happen on the Hill, but there's still a pushback of like, what are you teaching them? You're teaching them life skills, but we have to tie it to the workforce. Right? So we have to recognize that these kids, if they cannot self-regulate, have perspective taking, manage their emotion, then they will have difficulties concurrently academically, and they will have problems in relationships vis-a-vis bullying. Okay? And so we have to, this is something, it's just amazing to me that talking about social-emotional learning, not really early childhood and elementary school, but in middle and high school, there's still a question, kids still need that. Yes, grown adults need it. Teachers need it. The faculty over there at the College of Education need it. Okay? So we all need it. I include myself in that. Problem solving, communication skills, friendship skills. We all need this lifelong. And I'll tell you one thing, if they don't get it early, it's challenging to add to that, although it's not hopeless. If I had time, I'd tell a story. We don't have time for that. It was a good story, though. Okay. These slides I'm going to go through, kind of repeat that, but these are specific to Illinois standards and goals that you can align as you do your breakouts and your strands, thinking about how you're going to address these things. The other thing I want to say is that many of you may not have an SEL program in your classroom, but you do SEL work all the time. When have you put down in writing what you do? See, because if you trained with me as a psychologist, you would write about it all the time. So how is it that your teaching philosophy includes social-emotional learning? I'm in the classrooms, I see it. It's alive and well. But for some teachers, you need to make it much more concrete. And it needs to be much more structured. We need to make sure that the kids are getting kind of the same dose across the years. There's another goal. Another goal. Because essentially what we're trying to do in social-emotional learning, and many of you are too, is to build a strong foundations of skills for kids so that they can manage all of the stuff that's coming at them. Because the reality is that we're only going to be able to protect them and buffer them within the context of that classroom. And you want to send them out with the best set of tools so that when they encounter bumps in the road, and they will, some more than others, some way too more than others, that they have something to draw upon. I always have a dream before my talk, right? So I was just giving a talk to the Catholic Teachers Association on LGBT issues, and that was really fun with the priest sitting there. So the night before that, I had a dream that they wouldn't let me out of the country afterwards. But last night, I had a dream. I have a nephew that I've just brought from reactive attachment disorder to this budding, beautiful 5-year-old that actually looks at your eyes and says thank you and please. I did my own SEL experiment with him, and it worked. But he was in a Corvette driving. Just stay with me. He was in a Corvette driving, and he's 5, right? And it was a nice white Corvette. And I was pushing kind of behind him on this dark road. And to me, I was like, that is kind of, because I was thinking about this last night. Like, I did this SEL experiment with my 4-year-old nephew, who's now 5 and gorgeous and beautiful and has SEL skills and can recite them for you. But yet I still feel that he's so vulnerable in this car, and I'm just kind of directing, and I'm telling you, we were going around these blinded courts. I was like, that is so cool. See, my PhD in psychology paid off. That's right. That's called dream work. So as social emotional learning, what we're trying to do is address multiple issues. So when Caden gets out there into kindergarten, he encounters things, he's going to know how to do all of those SEL skills. But I'm not going to protect him from all of the woes out there, but he's going to have a foundation. That's what we're going to do. And it could be bullying, it could be teenage pregnancy, it could be alcohol and drug stuff, it could be dropping out of school, whatever it is, this is what we're doing. Okay. SEL is based on, there's a huge research foundation here based on risk and protective factors. It includes the kind of bullying. We know a lot of the SEL work is informed by brain research. I don't have time to talk about that, but certainly we do know that understanding emotions and getting kids to understand emotion regulation involves the discussion around brain chemistry. It's really a positive approach. See, this bullying is so negative. Why not prosocial, prosocial, prosocial? Here's some skills to help you navigate life. And understanding that as you do social emotional learning, it's going to really be a developmental approach. And that the young kids you talk to in first grade that we work with is a very different conversation than what I have with the beautiful 7th graders that I work with, where, you know, why do they have to know anything about feelings? And so it has to be developmental control. Okay. This is a nice video as well. We won't show it, but it speaks to going beyond the programs, right? And that it's not necessarily the programs, it's the skills, but it's also a climate shift in the school. Because what we're seeing in our randomized clinical trial is that we are changing aggressive behaviors, but I'm pretty sure that the social emotional learning skills of the teachers are improving. And that'll be my next grant to measure that, because I believe that the teachers are learning how to problem solve, slow down, regulate their emotions, and I can see it when I observe them implementing a lesson after 2 years of a lesson. So this is really nice in that it has to be this community building. It can't just be a binder that's handed to a teacher, and that's why it's beyond programs. But also you need to see the programs as a way to implement social emotional learning within the environment of No Child Left Behind in testing, right? So we still have to be pragmatic, but eventually as SEL framework and theories and skills take hold in a school, you see it transform outside that binder. We see it in our schools. It's kind of magical. It rests with the administrator. It rests with the buy-in with the teachers. We also have to recognize a lot of the SEL programming and framework engages the kids. They like the role playing, they like the didactic group work. But it's also important to take this home. In our study, we send homework home with the kids, and they do social emotional learning programming with their families. And I see in one of the strands you're talking about engaging families. And SEL and family work is exactly what we need to do, because that's repetition, right? And if you can even get one parent to engage in some anger management that's positive, counting to 10, it's going to pay off for all of us, okay? Thinking about incorporating SEL through writing assignments, integration of activities. And of course, we do this well in this state because we have standards, right? And we essentially, so when I talk to people outside of Illinois, they're like, what are you talking about? Right? So it's very different in Illinois. It's nice to be home. Okay, this is a paper that I will just make sure that Lisa has. This was a randomized clinical trial. It was published in the School Psych Review. Huge effects and reductions of bullying from self-report, teacher report, and direct observations on the playground. This is Steps to Respect, which is Committee for Children program, really research evidence-based. This was schools in California. Showed quite the reduction. Thought I had 2 hours. And then in our study, let me just show you, and then I'll do the wrap-up slides. This is just pre-post. This is 1 year, 15 weeks of second step, which is a social emotional learning program. in 18 schools in Illinois and Kansas, 18 intervention schools and 18 controls. So it's a randomized clinical trial, kind of all the rigor that we want and the Capitol Hill wants us to have to control everything. We actually found 30% less, we've 30% reduction of physical fighting in our intervention schools. From a public health perspective, that's huge. That is remarkable. Now, we didn't in that first year have a reduction in low-level bullying because I think it's more underground and it's more covert. It's going to take more time. We're at the end of 2 years, so we're just kind of in the field doing makeups on that right now. And we're hoping that we'll see these more subtle forms, kind of we chip away at that. But to have a 30% reduction of physical fighting, most administrators would be very, very happy with that, and the teachers are pretty darn happy with this finding. I've got to write that up this afternoon so we can get it out there and make sure that the Hill knows that SL, look at that. Now they will pay attention to physical fighting reductions more than they will bullying. So we're happy about that. We hope that holds. Okay, so let me just do some summary wrap up. What do I have? 2 seconds. Yeah. This is the exact person I said I would never turn into, right? Keep saying that every day. That person, I won't get off the podium. Okay, so essentially what we're learning, full circle, bullying prevention's not working. We have bullying prevention programs. Many of you are going to be forced in this state, unfortunately, with unfunded mandates to pick a program. If you have to pick a program, I'd say go with SEL at this point. If your district buys the Norwegian program, they should probably know that it's no longer on the National Registry and it's about to be taken off the blueprint. So we can rethink that, although we have many districts in this state that have spent a lot of money on that program. So we need to give kids life skills and social skills, not just knowledge about bullying. Bottom line is, in this environment, and the environment's not going to change, right? We have teachers about to strike in CPS. We have lots of issues happening all over this country. The environment is what it is. And so how do we equip generations of kids with the life and social skills in the best way we can, knowing that that climate is not going to change? We also need to develop more secondary and tertiary. Social-emotional learning tends to be universal in most of the ways it's implemented. There's still kids that need more. They need more. We need wraparound. We need that kind of tiered approach. We also, I didn't talk about this today, but anybody that knows my work, I fight really hard for gender nonconforming LGBT youth in this country, and none of these prevention programs, even SEL programs, touch this. So even with a good SEL program, we're not going to address the marginalization of LGBT youth in this country, kids with disabilities, kids of immigrant children, undocumented children. I can go on and on and on. Luckily, we do have a civil rights. We have civil rights in this country, and the Office of Civil Rights has taken that on to make sure that our bullying prevention and legislation across the country are enumerated, and that these groups of kids are identified, and really kind of pushing schools to make sure that they're addressing these issues. And we also have to recognize that there is a peer norm around some of these behaviors. Kids socialize one another. If we're not shifting that social norm through social norms approaches, we will continue to fail. And that's teenage pregnancy, drug and alcohol abuse, and aggression. And then there are simple strategies. If you will be, as administrators and teachers, held accountable for bullying, as much as I want the word to go away, it's not going to go away. And parents will still kind of say, what are you doing? What are you doing? So on the slide, you'll see that there's simple solutions. You need to make sure that you have a reporting system, that you're defining it. I don't think we'll ever be able to accurately define bullying because it's so elusive in some ways. But we'll make sure you get this PowerPoint. You should know your anti-bullying policy, because if there's a lawsuit in your school and you can't recite it in a deposition, that's not going to be good. So you should probably know your anti-bullying policy. Other types of things to think about that we've talked about, PBIS is showing some extreme promise in the area of bullying as well. There was a randomized clinical trial that was just published in some high schools that I can make available to you as well, looking at PBIS. And they showed reductions in bullying in the playground, and they showed an increase in peer acceptance in that RCT. Okay, and then also just remember there are other realistic strategies that have been identified in the meta-analysis that are working in other countries. Parent training is emerging consistently as an important feature in preventing a lot of at-risk behavior, if you will. Increasing playground supervision, non-punitive disciplinary methods, homeschool, communication, effective classroom rules, effective classroom management, and embed this in the curriculum as much as possible. And SEL will be a mechanism to do that. And that's it. Thank you. We have time for questions. I know I talk fast, and I always say I'm going to talk slower, but I apologize for that. So questions, concerns, something about that piqued your interest that I didn't follow up on? Yes?
Here in Illinois, we do have the SES standards. Is there less incidence of bullying in Illinois as opposed to the rest of the nation? It still feels like it goes on in our schools quite a bit, and I just don't know why my perspective is skewed because this is what I know.
Right. So the question is, oh, okay, so we have these standards. Do we have less bullying than any other state? In these schools, in the meta-analysis, the Durlac meta-analysis would say that in the schools where SEL is implemented with fidelity, okay, because a lot of people say they have SEL and then you go in and you're like, where is it? Where there's high implementation fidelity, there's less disruptive behavior, 20% reduction of antisocial behavior. Is that unique to Illinois? We don't have the data. We don't have the data. A lot of those questions, those are exactly the questions that politicians want to answer. Now, they did pay attention to the Durlac meta-analysis, but those were studies across the state. Yes?
Are there lesson plans available for like what that woman was doing on the TV show?
Yes. Yeah, there's plenty of programs. You want to go to www.castle.org. What they've done, castle.org, is they've done systematic reviews, both quantitatively but also qualitatively, because they recognize that not everybody has a couple $1 million to do a randomized clinical trial. And so they've reviewed every SEL program, framework, approach in the country, and you can get that off of there. And so that depending on which program or lesson plan you want to go with, it's available. Yeah. Yes?
You keep saying your program is going to be taken off the National Registry. What is the National Registry?
Yeah, so the National Registry, this is so fascinating, right? So if you are an administrator or superintendent and you need to address your teenage pregnancy issue, or whatever issue, if you go to the National Registry, you can find which programs the United States of a government approve that have enough evidence to suggest that they're effective. Oh, yes. Administrators and folks know this. Now, there's different, so the National Registry is really where they're scrutinized the highest, and you can type in just a word, and it comes up. If you just put in National Registry, it's there. It's kind of the clearing. There's also a clearinghouse of what works. There's blueprints, which just evaluate violence prevention, but that funding was cut, so blueprints. Yeah, it's a whole different world, but these are the programs that your superintendents should be going to those, and they go to the National Register and like, I just saw it on the National Registry. What do you mean it isn't proven? So our government's putting a stamp of approval on programs, yet they're not effective. Do you see? This is not unique to bullying prevention. This happens in reading. This happens, yes, it's everything, National Registry, yeah. And next time I'll remember to put a link up for you, or I can send it to Lisa too. And you should start, just looking around. There's also clinicaltrials.gov, which you can actually look at clinical trials in whatever area. So what's happened is that there's been much more public scrutiny to everything, right? Once the resources are diminished, everybody's like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so it's every program, social programs being evaluated, which is great for us. In some ways, not so great for the developers. They're making money. I saw a hand back there. Yes? Yeah, so my talk last year, which I'm sure, Bob, you filmed that, didn't you? Yeah. I know everybody. Bob. I presented a lot of basic research last year, and consistently we're finding in our longitudinal work where we track kids from 5th grade, our kids are in high school, consistently sibling aggression is showing up as a predictor of involvement in bullying, not just as a perpetrator at school, that ringleader perpetration, but also as victimization, right? And so since last year, we've published a few papers that and this is not sibling aggression where, give me the Wii controller. We're fighting over that. This is, I fear I'm going to be hospitalized, or I have been hospitalized. And I've said last year, I feel sibling aggression as a proxy for family violence. You know, these kids, this is modeled behavior. And so it does appear that those kids that are victimized at home are at risk for perpetrating at school, aggression, and then they're at risk for victimization, which we've written quite a few papers this last year on victims. So with the audience being teachers and also school psychologists, to recognize when that kid is victimized in your classroom, it may not be their first victimization experience. And those poly victims look very, very different. You must assume that there's something behind any kind of aggression or victimization within the context of a classroom. So we try to write that. There's this idea that somehow peer victimization just kind of evolved. No, you can actually, and I spoke about this last year too, you can have kids that are maltreated or exposed to domestic violence in the home, and that places them at risk for having a closed working model, right? They're not going to trust people, look at what people do that love them. And then when they go to school, they have difficulty making friends. Well, having difficulty making friends then places you at risk for victimization. Now, if you're only paying attention to the victimization and not to the fact that there's probably some type of trauma that's contributing to their inability to listen and engage with others, then you're missing the entire story. So that's kind of what the story that unfolds within our context of our literature. Yes?
What's something you could tell us to encourage our colleagues who are angry about us having to do the parents' jobs?
Wow. Yeah, because they were all raised by beautifully wonderful socio-emotional learning parents. Okay. Well, I would just challenge the basic assumption. I think that we're teachers, community members, professors, video folks, as community members, we have to think we're all raising these kids. And I think I said last year, if I see a kid acting out on the train like I saw last night, I say something. It takes a village, right? And we continue to say this. But so for me, that teacher needs to go to therapy because that teacher has lost sight of what they're doing here. Go do something else. Let someone else come into your position. I don't get it. I don't get it. You know, I could say the same thing about my sister who doesn't care for her children. What am I going to do? Bitch about that? No, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go, we're having an SEL intervention. That's what we're doing. Because she's not going to change. She's not going to change. That teacher's not going to change either. Hey, the administrator should say, you have just failed on the ability to evaluate your role as a teacher. Right? You're not going to stay in corporate America if you're like, why do we have to do this? It's an attitude problem. That's video. Did you turn that off, Bob? Oh, okay, we're done? Okay. You guys have a great Chancellor's Academy. Hopefully you have something to think about.